Now, here's what happens. Once you emerge out of cessation, for a being who enters the path of the Sotapanna, who becomes a stream enterer, this is what happens. The mind emerges out of cessation of perception and feeling. And the very first formation that arises is the mental, and then the physical, and then the verbal. And this is why, and this is how. If you'll notice, it's the reverse. You were first tranquilizing the verbal, then the bodily, and then the mental. But now when you emerge, or when mind emerges, it's first the mental that arises, then the physical or the bodily, and then the verbal. And here is why, and here is how it happens. The formations start up when mind emerges from cessation. Then they activate a consciousness, which then becomes established. But this consciousness, up until this point, is pure. The reason why is because, as the sutta states, mind slants and inclines towards the Nibbana element. It calls it, the sutta calls it seclusion, but this is the Nibbana element. And why is it that? Because it is contact with the Nibbana element, which is the emptiness. Emptiness means empty of self, the not self aspect of Nibbana. The signless, because mind has understood with experience the impermanence of all existence, and therefore is not, that contact doesn't latch onto anything. It doesn't, it's not rooted in any kind of craving for anything at that point in time. And then you have the undirected contact. This is also known as the desireless contact in some suttas. And what that means is it's the understanding through experience which you had, or which a being has in the sphere of infinite consciousness, the unsatisfactory nature of existence. So that contact with that awareness, with that understanding, which comes from those formations, by the way, is undirected, because it does not look for anything to latch onto. When this happens, now this is actually at the level of contact, which is the faculty of contact, and then the actual contact with the Nibbana element. What happens is there's a feeling. Now that feeling, when that comes about, is conditioned, if you will, by those formations. But again, because the contact is unconditioned, or it's contact with the unconditioned, the feeling remains pure, meaning there's no sense of self in that feeling. There's no sense of craving or conceit in that feeling. But the reaction or the response to that feeling is what then creates the rest of the links, which is craving. So in the case of a Sotapanna, they have understood that the way to cessation and Nibbana is not through rites and rituals, and they have no doubt about the path. So doubt and rites and rituals, or the fetters of doubt and the fetters of depending on rites and rituals for Nibbana, are gone, are destroyed, are eliminated. And the self-view of the body and of existence is also eliminated. There is conceit, and here is why. When the experience happens, in most cases, for most beings, when they attain Sotapanna, there is this immense relief. So first they see the links, which is to say they have the contact with the links which are at this point in time unfettered and unpolluted. But as soon as the reaction of that relief is there, they identify with that relief, and they have this craving for this relief. So the craving is still there. And then, you have the fruition aspect of it. Then you get into Sakadagami and Sakadagami fruition, where, again, this whole process arises. But this time, the formations that will create that craving are weakened. And so in a Sakadagami, that relief is less. And you might not, as a being who enters into the Sakadagami path and fruition, experience that same sort of relief that you experienced as a Sotapanna. But what will happen is the intensity of craving will have lessened, because those formations have become weakened. And when they are finally destroyed, it happens because at the stage of an anagami, those formations, instead of being hindered by craving, they continue on, but there is no craving attached to that relief, but there is still an identification with that relief, which is that conceit aspect of it. So in an anagami with path and fruition, the fetters that, or the corruptions or the taints that influence the formations for craving are destroyed. So one of the taints, which is the taint of sensual craving, is destroyed. And then at the level of the Arahant with path and fruition, what happens is that contact that arises, which is the empty contact, the not self aspect of Nibbana, the signless contact, the understanding of impermanence, and the undirected or desireless contact remains that way. Because the reaction or the response that occurs from that contact and that feeling is that there is no identification with that feeling or with that relief, if there is at all any of that relief anymore. And so that contact remains pure, if you will. And that is why then craving, or the ignorance behind that craving and the conceit behind that craving, and therefore the other higher fetters that are dependent upon conceit and ignorance, are completely destroyed. And how that happens is because the formations no longer have the attention, which is the nutriment or the fuel that allows them to go beyond to craving and so on, and down the links of dependent origination. And because they don't have that anymore, they don't have that nutriment, they fall away and they're gone completely. So the taints of being, which are rooted in the sense of becoming and the conceit, are destroyed. And of course, the taint of ignorance is destroyed because it no longer has the reaction, the karmic reaction that it requires to continue to sustain itself. So when the response of an Arahant, when they come out of cessation in path and fruition, is that of just having that contact remain pure, in the sense of understanding that everything is impermanent, not self, and unsatisfactory, it remains that way. That is why there is an emphasis in a lot of the suttas that because his mind was not grasping, it means that the contact had nothing to grasp onto. His taints were destroyed and he attained arahantship. So in the same way, the way the formations that arise, because those formations of conceit, those deep-rooted formations of conceit and ignorance no longer have that attention that it can continue down the line to create any kind of subtle suffering. They don't have that attention. They fall away. That is when one attains arahantship. This is the way the whole process works in relation to formations and cessation.